Changing is a big business. I read recently that the United States changing business has amounted to about 27.5 billion disposable diapers a year. That turns out to be about 3.5 tons of disposable diapers every year in the United States. Now, that is a lot of changing going on. By the way, that changing is kind of one at a time. That's the way change happens, one thing at a time. Of course, as we grow up, changes of different kinds do take place. There are all kinds of changes that we encounter in our lives. Some of them are unexpected. Some of them are carefully orchestrated. We work very hard to make some changes in our lives. Some changes are pleasant. Some changes are very difficult, very hard to absorb. Change happens in relationships. Change happens in our health. Change can happen financially. Change can happen politically. And some people say, bring it on, you know. Change is something that can even go to church. When we encounter change at church, that can be challenging as well. We can change our minds about things from time to time, and that has repercussions as well. If we doubt the reality of change, I have a challenge for you. Just look at some old family pictures for a while. You'll see some changes. Change is an important subject and is one that we can all relate to. Changing obviously is not just for babies. But how do we respond to change? How do I respond to change? Sometimes not very well. It's always a challenge. The very idea of change can be downright terrorizing to us sometimes. We don't like change. We don't want to change many times. But it's important to remember that change is a biblical thing. As a matter of fact, we're going to start right at that point today by looking at the example of Joshua and Old Testament Israel from Joshua chapter 1. And there we see great change taking place. This was a very difficult kind of change that was coming to the nation Israel at that time. It was a break with their past because they were dealing with one of the most difficult kinds of changes that we will ever encounter in life, and that is death. The very first verse of the chapter says, "Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead." Can you imagine having been led by the likes of Moses, and he died? These people were crushed. How could they even think of going on without Moses? Now, as much as we do cherish the past, we must not pretend that we can make it last. We can never live in the past, can we? It doesn't work. As a matter of fact, the Lord has tried over and over again in Scripture to prepare people for that very reality. In Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 and 19, we read, "Remember ye not the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing." God has always been doing things which to us will appear to be very new and very different. Yes, they were going to have to break with their past in order to move forward. And the entire populace, the entire nation would have to deal with this. Verse number 2, God tells Joshua, "Now therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people. The whole nation was going to be moving into a different situation. They were going to have to struggle with neighbors. And it turns out they ended up struggling with each other as well during this time of change. To this day, Israel still struggles with neighbors, with themselves. And so change never really ends. Historically, God's people have had to deal with change. It just happens. It just happens. They were going to not only have to break with their past and deal with this universally as a nation, they were going to a whole new place for them. Joshua was told, go unto the land which I do give to them. Now, not only was this going to be a geographical change, it was certainly an experiential change for them as well. They were moving from being a nomadic people to being warriors, literal warriors. They were going to have to fight for every square inch of that land that was going to be theirs. That's the way God ordained it. They were going to have to claim it through battles. Of course, God was behind all of that. God was in charge, but in possessing the land, they were going to a whole new place. Have you ever felt like that something just happened in your life, and all of a sudden, man, you're not in Kansas anymore. You're in a whole new place. And it's uncomfortable sometimes to wake up and see that is the situation. Well, if we find ourselves sometimes in new territory, it's nice to know that we can follow a leader who is even greater than Joshua in going into that new place. Yes, it was going to be very difficult for Israel to navigate that kind of change. It was going to be a very demanding time for them. For one thing, it demanded that they trust in God's promises to them. I read in verse number 6 of Joshua 1. Be strong and be of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land, catch this, which I swear unto their fathers to give them. God had made great promises concerning this very thing, this land that they were now possessing. And that's why they could be so strong and courageous, because God had promised that it would become theirs. We live in a degenerate culture, don't we? Have you noticed that? Change seems to go from bad to worse. Seems like the opponents grow in strength and in their ferocity and in their confrontationalism of basic biblical concepts. We run into that all the time. But yet we also have a great promise from God. Israel was promised a land. But catch this from the words of Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. There you go. We know the end of the story. So let's hang in there. Let's endure whatever change and whatever challenge that is before us. It will be worth it all. It was a demanding time, yes. Demanded that Joshua and his people would trust the promises of God. But it also demanded that they be persistent in their obedience as they underwent this huge change in their situation. Verses 7 and 8. God told Joshua, only observe to do according to all the law. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night. Then thou shalt have good success. Whatever change that they perceived was happening in their lives, and it was a lot of change, new leadership, new territory, a lot of stuff going on there. Through all of that change, God demanded that they be obedient people. That's important to remember in a time of change. just obey God day by day as we undergo the changes of life. Well, it reminds me of 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. Like Joshua was told that he should obey the law, not turning to the right hand or to the left. We are told in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18, but we all with open face beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. As we look to the Lord, He will indeed, by His Spirit, see us through the daily challenges. Now, in the change that Israel and Joshua underwent, through all of that, they could have peace, even in the middle of it all. I call your attention now to verse number 9, where Joshua was told, "Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid." I know what it is to be afraid in the middle of change. I really know what that's like. I don't have to detail that, but I understand that. But believers in all ages, including our own, here and now, can still have peace in an otherwise uncertain and changing world situation. Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse number 8, one of my favorite verses when it comes to this type of thing. "And the Lord, He it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed." Now, that's easier to read than it is to go through as an experience. But yet, it is an absolute fact that we can experience peace, inner peace, in the middle of turmoil around about us. Why is that? Well, let's just think about it. From what we have said and what we're going to continue to see in this passage, this change even in the nation of Israel and in the life of Joshua, it was a big change for him, that's for sure. This change was of divine origin. This did not just sort of happen. Moses didn't die when he died in the way he died just by chance. This was God's doing. This was all divinely controlled. And it still is. Well, they would be divinely protected through all of this because it was God's doing. In verse number 5, "There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life." Now, the Canaanites were powerful people, the inhabitants of the land, the owners of the land. A few years ago, I was on a tour of Israel, and we went to a place called Hazor. And there are still very impressive remnants of the citadels, of the fortresses of the Canaanites. Oh, yeah. The Israelites were up against a huge challenge there in going forward, and they were facing fierce enemies. But I also saw in Hazor, just down the path around the corner, another pile of archaeological evidence of an Israelite house right in the middle of a Canaanite society. Wow. You see, God was protecting them and helping them prevail even in the middle of their battles with the Canaanites. God was protecting them. And He does. That's what God does. Because He was also present with them, as He promised in verse number 5 as well. It must have been such a comfort for Joshua stepping into the sandals of somebody like Moses to hear God say, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee." Literally, I understand what God was telling Joshua was this: I won't drop you, and I won't abandon you. I love that. God's not going to drop us. I remember once when I was very young, I was trying to get acquainted with my new baby niece. She was just a little thing. And I was holding her, and I dropped her. I dropped the baby. Well, fortunately, she must have bounced rather safely off the floor because she didn't suffer any permanent damage or any even temporary damage as far as I know. I still think about that and I say, oh no. But when I think about a verse like this, God said, I won't drop you. You know, underneath are the everlasting arms. He is not going to abandon us or fail us in any way. Now, God's divine care is absolutely pervasive. When I say this is all of God's doing, His protection, His presence, everything about what we experience in life, including great change, God's care for us is pervasive. Verse number 9, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. We can't go anywhere. We can't do anything that is outside our Lord's sovereign control and care. That is wonderful to know, isn't it? We just love the verse in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 for good reason. You know the words probably. We absolutely know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose, even in a time of great change.